I think we start in. Dinda. Dinda, dann Deville, dann Edna und dann Sabine. So, good morning, everyone. We'd like to start. So, if you find a seat, we go ahead. Yeah, so welcome to our event on the contribution of local climate justice struggles to a gender just implementation of the UNFCCC. I think what we are all aware of is that working on climate change requires a gender-sensitive lens and a strong focus on justice. So I'm happy that we can organize this event here today. My name is Nadia Sharabi. I will try to facilitate the panelists and the discussion. I work for the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, a German-based but internationally working political foundation. And then further on the panel, we have Neville Mokoena. She's from Gender CC South Africa. That's Neville. Sorry, because we don't have nameplates. Neville works on, she's a gender and climate activist from South Africa, also a project coordinator who works with local women and also local authorities on climate change policies. Then we have Dinda Yura. She is from Solidaritas Perempuan, Indonesia, Women's Solidarity for Human Rights. And Dinda works especially also on with local women on climate justice, gender justice, and also Red Plus project, isn't it? Further, we have so Dinda. And then on the left of Dinda is Edna Kaptoyo. She works for the Indigenous Information Network in Kenya, and she's also a advisor working on indigenous rights issues related to climate change, both on the local and national, but also international level, also engaged with the Global Environmental Facility. Last but not least, the very right for me is Sabine Minninger. She is a policy advisor on climate change with Bread for the World. maybe just a short explanation why also organizing this panel. I have also already said in my first words that it's very clear that climate change has severe impacts on local communities. It hits hardest the poorest and most vulnerable people, and often it's them who have answers or kind of solutions at hand, but these alternatives, I would call them, don't get a chance to be negotiated about at the international level. And on the other hand, certain solutions or so-called solutions are negotiated at the international level, while maybe they fail to really address local needs. On the other hand, it's also often a lack of information, maybe on both sides. And it's also lack of capacities of local communities to really come here to these international debates and bring up their arguments. That's why since this year, Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, together with Live e.V. and Gender CC, has started to implement the project, Not Without Us, Women for Gender and Climate Justice, that tries to aim at, or that aims at really training 3 women from Ecuador, and then 2 are here of them, Dinda and Neville, to really understand the UNFCCC process, to learn how to advocate for their interests, but also to bring back the information they gain from here to the local communities and strengthen them. But maybe let's look first at what the UNFCCC offers as solutions to certain problems. We would like to ask, oh, it's you first, right? You ready? Yeah, sorry. I mixed up the order. I'd like to ask Neville to explain to us a little bit about the situation in South Africa when it comes to food sovereignty and food security. We have heard about concepts called climate smart agriculture being discussed here at the UNFCCC, but we also are afraid that these concepts are actually only serving the interest of large corporations and maybe not the interests of local farmers. So, please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ndivile Mukwena from Gender CC, Southern Africa, in South Africa, Johannesburg. I am happy to be here and to get this opportunity to bring the local voices to the international level. And indeed, women at local level are saying the negotiations cannot take place without us. I'm just waiting for the slide, but while waiting for that, I'll just give a brief scenario of what is taking place in South Africa. 70% of the population in South Africa, oh, there we go. Okay, 70% of the population in South Africa comprises of rural dwellers. And those are mostly farmers who survive on the natural resources and on farming. And agriculture in South Africa takes place on a very edge of survival. And we have climate change threats like scarcity of water. We're looking at drought, we're looking at declining nutrition and also food insecurity. And I think most importantly, it's the legal system that legalize activities that add to climate change impacts to the local farmers. And women farmers, especially local women farmers, are at the very bottom of the economic ladder in South Africa. And also, South Africa, we used to export maize for quite a number of years, but for the last 2 years, we had to import maize. That says a lot about what is happening with the agricultural sector in South Africa. The challenges that local women are facing It's poverty and hunger, obviously, if we have food insecurity, lack of access and control of land, lack of access to credit and finance, and lack of support from the government. I've already mentioned water scarcity, and also crops that are affected by climate-induced storms. As you can see, the picture on the corner there, those are the tomatoes that were affected by the storms that are taking place in our country. And also patriarchy is also a challenge to the local women farmers. You know, those internal power dynamics, lack of resources and access to markets are some of the challenges. As you can see, this is the drought scenario, the middle picture, and the one on the far left, the scarcity of water. Agricultural false solution that affect local women farmers. The biofuels crops that come up with the corporations, and in South Africa they have, they are supporting the merger of corporations that are coming up with the genetically engineered seeds in South Africa. And that is putting a lot of pressure on the fertile land and also escalating the land acquisition, which makes the local farmers suffer most. And there's no transparency with all these decisions and all these agreements, and that undermines the land rights and food sovereignty of the people at local level. The growing and harvesting of biofuels process is not at all carbon neutral. Instead, it adds a lot to the greenhouse gas emissions. That bring rise to food prices and a lot of corporate control. In South Africa, we have corporate controlling the seeds. 90% of the seeds are controlled by the corporates in South Africa. And also there's an increase of genetically modified organisms, and that is also contributing to the declining nutrition in the food crops that are available in South Africa. Local farmers, in spite of all the challenges that they are facing with climate change impacts and also what is happening with the corporations, the agreements with the government, they try to come up with their local solutions, which is why we're saying when we bring the women voices to this level, we want those solutions at least to be acknowledged, to be considered. And they recycle garden waste, they recycle kitchen waste, and they use worms to make mulching and composting so that they can be able to prepare the land before they start planting the crops. And yes, they made home mature compost and also pest repellents. They make solutions, homemade solutions. They don't use any chemicals to repel the insects. They harvest water and use grey water for their gardens. They also organize themselves to enter into the big supply chain agreements, because as individuals, it's quite difficult to enter that market. So when they organize themselves as corporate, as groups, they are able to enter the market chain. And they document all their experiences and share with one another their challenges and also their achievement. And they are pro the agroecology processing approach, and also multi-cropping and horticulture methods. That is also good for things like mushroom and paprika peppers. They also use medicinal plants They use them to produce essential oils, and they also use them as part of multi-cropping to help their crops to yield better. As you can see in the pictures on the far left, it's a young lady. They are sharing information. They have papers there that have yielded quite good there. And the middle picture is quite an interesting one. They are using the maize meal bag to also plant. This is lettuce that they planted. Because they don't have land, they don't have resources, this is what they do. And the other picture there is when they are tilling the soil, preparing it for planting. In conclusion, women at the ground level, as I have said, that they feel that their solutions, their local solutions, have to be considered. And also the diversity of agricultural system, they feel that is the way to go. The indigenous and traditional knowledge has to also be taken cognizance of. The sharing of experience in the research development, it has to look at their knowledge. And also the protection of ecological food system using the agroecology-based approaches. The pictures you see there, it's women from Limpopo, which is in one of the provinces of South Africa. They have yielded there some spinach and cabbage, which is the good yields of multi-cropping, not only focusing on the monocropping, which is what is promoted by the corporations in South Africa. And on the other side, it's women from Eastern Cape, a province in South Africa, who are sharing seeds, because they also using saving seeds and using seed banks to save the seeds, which is what they were taught by their mothers. That is the tradition, how our forefathers and foremothers were using to save the seeds. And during the time of drought, you are able to share the seeds with others and start using them. They also sell seedlings to each other. You know, when they produce their yield, they don't just sell it, but they use it to produce something else. Like the tomatoes, they use tomato to make a tomato sauce, to produce something else that they can be able to use and share with others. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nivier, for giving us a really practical insights into what could be called smart agriculture, but from a very different perspective, I'd say. It's really developed by women on the local level. It's fueling kind of the local economy, and as I understood, you also helping to preserve indigenous traditional knowledge, and by this also somehow building up. I know some people here in the room don't like the word resilience. So that's really interesting. But then I would like to ask Dinda, when we now look at Indonesia, as far as I know, Indonesia still has some rainforests. They are being protected, or are they not? Or the solutions that are offered to protect the forests via programs, for example, called REDD+, are they really helpful? And what does that mean for especially communities and women at your place?
Thank you, Nadia. Can I have the remote? Okay. So thank you, everyone. My name is Dinda, and I would like to share some of our experiences and also the situations in Indonesia. And I will just skip this because Nadia already introduced me. And then I just so you know that I based in Jakarta, but I also work with our branches in some areas and mostly working with the women in the coastal areas and also women farmers and women who living in the around the forest. So we know that this is just some of the pictures of the impacts of climate change that I believe that all of us already know about it, about the abrasions, about the disaster and all of those things. But what I want to highlight is the impact of climate change itself are not gender neutral. So you can see some pictures here how women, when the water already contaminated, they have to go far away for the water. But they're not only doing that, but they also have to doing the domestic things like taking care of the childrens and those kind of things. So you can see how women also have the multiple burden. The climate crisis itself, it's really impact women in the very deep and layered impact. But in the other hand, Devile already share a very inspiring initiative of women farmers. And in the forest, we see also the women have some of the initiative by themselves, by their community. Of course, they have to be adapt so they can survive from the climate crisis. So they forced to be adapt. And then, but women also have some initiative in terms of mitigations because nature, forest, land is a part of a women's life. There are very strong connections between women and forest, for example, that we really find when we are working with them on the ground. So of course they don't. They really want their forest become sustained. They really don't want that the forest will be end soon. So automatically they also have some of the mechanism. Maybe it's only the simple mechanism. It's not really something big, but this is their mechanism to protect their nature, to protect the earth. And I would like to share about this is what Nadia asked about the RED Plus project, because we're also doing this monitoring project of the Kalimantan Forest and Climate Partnership. So this project was conducted in Central Kalimantan, and we see we see that in the process, women only become the object, especially as a labor who have to planting the seeds. It's not only women, but the society themselves is not really involved in the projects. So they only know that they have to planting something, but they don't know anything about the climate change. They don't know that what they're doing is to preserve the world or preserve the earth, for example. So beside that, there are welfare program actually by this project, but they only like distributing the seeds that not really fit with the structure of the land in the area. So it's failed, and the welfare of the people really not become the consideration of this project. And the other things is there are more burden for women because there were a conflict, societal conflict, because the disbursement process is not transparent. So some of the society got the disbursement, but the other society not, the other members of the society not get it. So it's also produced the conflicts among them. And then they block the canals, and it means they block the community's income and the livelihood, because women society that usually can access the forest for the medications plants, for example, or for their food, for their waters, they cannot access it anymore, and the income become decreased, and the welfare also become decreased. So the monitoring process already the women monitor these projects as well, and they also doing the advocacy in the local level, and finally the financial is not continued and the projects was end. And then I would like also raise about because we're talking about the forestry, and we know that nowadays the palm oil plant, the palm oil also considered as the bioenergy. Of course, we want to move on from the fossil fuels, but are we really want to take the palm oil as a solutions here? Because Indonesia is the one of the largest producers for the palm oil, and we really have a lot of experiences, land grabbings, and how it's also destroy our water resources, and how it's also make or produce the impoverishment in for the society whose land grabbed by the palm oil plantation company. So it's really, I think it's really sad that when we know that the impact of the climate crisis is the grab of the livelihood of the people, but then we come up with the solution that also grab the people's livelihood. So it's really important to us to consider about all of the actions or projects or even the solution that we think that we negotiate in these negotiations. And it's not only about the land grabbing, but how the women there who used to have the land for to be managed now become the laborers, and they really experience the labor rights violations, including including problems with the sexual and reproductive health with the very heavy fertilizers and without any safety mechanism that they got. So talking about the real solutions, what we know is the alternative solutions, but the question is, are we able to solve the climate crisis with only the alternative solution without we really decrease, we really drastically reduce the emissions from its source, and the biggest source that we know is the fossil fuel. In this negotiation, we have the working group. We're talking about agriculture, talking about the mitigation, talking about the threat plus, but who really thinking about how to limit or how to reduce emission from the fossil fuels? So if we talk about the real solutions, this discussion has to become our considerations. And then, of course, because the climate crisis itself already impact to the community, to the women, so reparations through the finance, it's become the important thing. And then the community and right-based mitigations and adaptations, how it's become it's really taken into account in the negotiation. We really need support. We really need to support the community in terms of not only for the climate actions that they already have the initiative, but also their struggle in defending their rights. So we don't want any actions that grab their sovereignty, and it's really we really hope that we can talk about the programs, the actions that really coming from the community and to strengthening them as well. And then, of course, it's require the full participations of the community, men and women, in decision making on the management of natural resources. And in terms of participation, of course, it's also include how to build the capacity or strengthening the capacity of women, so they can also participate in any decision making process. And yes, we will have gender action plan to be adopted soon, and it's as I read it, it's quite strong with the principle of gender sensitive, gender responsive, and also the coverage is quite comprehensive. But what we need to think about and discuss for the further is, it's not only the actions, but how it's also integrated with the policies making in these negotiations or even in the national and local levels. So how we can use this gender action plan also to make sure that all of the climate policies and actions is with the principle of gender inclusive, sensitive, and responsive. So it will be avoid, and it will ensuring women which the most effective are effectively involved and also not impacted by any kind of false solution. I think that's my what I can share now, and I hope to be discussed with you more.
Thank you very much, Dinda, for also giving us some really meaningful insights into several issues actually that you have addressed. For example, the whole problem of REDD+ projects, not only in terms of what is quite known, land grabbing, but also in a way of that, farmers then do not really profit from the so-called social welfare programs around it, and that they also start becoming laborers instead of farmers in a certain way, and they are very dependent on their kind of organizations for whom they work. Labor rights are violated, also in the palm oil industry, and what that also means, especially for women, you have just mentioned. I think you pointed out a big elephant in the room, which we face here quite often in the negotiations. It is a strong call for phasing out fossil fuels globally, but also especially here in Germany, as we're in Germany. So I think discussing climate change, climate protection without discussing, really discussing phasing out of fossil fuels really is like a problem. And last but not least, also the Gender Action Plan. I think the point you made is we can also discuss that later. Maybe you are all invited to discuss it with us. Do we also kind of run into a situation where the whole issue of gender is kind of being sidelined in like action plans, but while it's not being discussed enough in all the other policies where it should be mainstreamed. I think before we move on to the next part of this session, where we would look more at loss and damage, I'd like to ask the audience if you have questions, especially questions of understanding, because we have more time for discussion at the very end. If there's any microphone in the room, and if people have questions, my colleague will pass around the microphone. You raise your hand, please, and I think we can allow 2 or 3 questions. But if there's nothing, we move on and we discuss. Okay, yeah. And maybe you can introduce yourself very quickly and, yeah.
I'm Erima Gloria Ori. I am from Nigeria. I also teach environmental law and gender issues. I'd like to say thank you and well done for the well-researched presentation. My reaction to it, like I also discussed with some of the women yesterday, is to find out what the law is in your places concerning women, the rights of women in owning land, because it's a fundamental issue in every development you are doing on any improvement you are doing on land, whether it's agriculture or construction or whatever. So is the regulation or the laws in your place encouraging of women's right to land acquisition? Secondly, what is also your regulation on the tax regulation? Do you have tax waivers on such? Because I know, like in Nigeria, there are some projects you are doing and you have a tax holiday, like for 2 years or for 3 years, for you to be able to consolidate on such programs. Do we have similar encouragement, although we do not have it in agriculture? So my second question is, do you have such in agriculture in your place? Something like a tax incentive that will encourage women to be able to do this? If not, it's something to look into as a gender issue, a way of encouraging women to be able to do this kind of agricultural activity without being asked to pay tax or to start paying tax immediately. Thank you.
Okay, there's one more question, and then the panelists will shortly answer.
One question to the last speaker. What do you think is the solution to the palm oil problem? I mean, you have the dilemma of keeping women at work and protecting nature in the best possible way. Thank you.
Devir, would you like to answer first?
We don't have agricultural laws per se in South Africa. However, there are some incentives that are offered by the government, local government, provincial government, and the national government, whereby they encourage women to start their own food garden or to start a communal garden using the schools or the clinics, any department land that they can use. And now what is said about that is that at times they'll give them subsidies, like they'll give them seeds to say, we give you a startup kit, here are the seeds, here are the tools, and so forth. And you find that most of those seeds are the genetically engineered seeds. And women want to do organic farming because that affects their health, their children's health, and also their productivity. And we don't have any legal laws protecting the farmers. I would say farming for small-scale farmers is not yet legalized, and it's controlled at a very community level. They have to organize themselves and see what is it that they can do to protect themselves. And yes, with land acquisition, it's quite a challenge for women because there's also traditional patriarchy, which will not allow a woman to own a land. It will be a man, or rather your son as a woman. But as a woman, it's difficult that you can own land that is like heritage or so forth. So it is really a struggle for women to acquire land, and there are really no laws that are protecting women or giving them opportunities to be able to own land. Thank you.
Well, I think the issues about the palm oil plantation is not standing alone. It's not only related with the climate issues, but it's also related with the corporate with the land grabbings and or injustice between the poor and rich, and how our policies also regulating these kind of things in our national level. But what I'm thinking is, whatever the solutions that we need to produce, we always say that we need the clean energy, but clean energy is not really enough, but we really have to see it's not harmful in terms of not only harmful directly, but it's also talking about how the human rights violations that potentially will be violated on the ground. So for me, whatever the solutions that we offer, it should be see the situations of the community on the ground. It should be, we really need to ensure that any kind of projects is not grabbing their land, grabbing their livelihood, and just replicate the same situation actually that caused by the climate crisis. So, but if you ask what we can do now in terms of the palm oil issues, for example, in Indonesia, we are also struggling for the bill of the palm oil bill, because now our government won't make it easier for the investment of the palm oil plantation. So we really struggle on that, and we also now in the process of the law about the land law, the bill of land, because it's also being discussed in our national process. So from the local struggles, that what we can do, and I really hope that in here, because I think it's really needs the discussions also between us, how we can address these issues. Thank you.
All right. I mean, there will be more time for discussion, questions, answers, and we hope really to involve all of you after 2 more presentations. So I hope you stay awake with us when we move on talking a little bit about loss and damage, first with Edna and then later with Sabine. I'd like to know from Edna, from your local context in Kenya, what are kind of the impacts when it comes to loss and damage, and like where do you see the gaps between what is negotiated here at the international level and what is actually really needed? Are there any solutions being provided, and are they helpful, or what is the problem?
Good afternoon. I'm Edna Kaptoyo, and I would like to thank RLS for organizing this event, and also for the amazing panelists from Dinda and Ndivile. Thank you for your insights. Can I have the thing? Oh, sorry. Yeah. So I'm going to share a bit about the Kenyan situation on loss and damage, what our local struggles, the responses that communities are undertaking, and also key asks in this process, and also for governments at the national level. So, of course, I wouldn't go to define, you already know about the loss and damage, and of course, we're looking at the loss of habitats, loss of lives, extinction maybe of species, and also the non-economic impacts that we have in terms of displacement, loss of cultural heritage, identity, and also which result in loss of food security. And of course, the damages that can be repaired of some kind, and also that communities cannot be able to really adjust to. Examples I have in Kenya, we know we're already experiencing climate change, and especially for indigenous people and indigenous women's communities, the climate change is there and it's happening, and it's a crucial issue for indigenous peoples in these spaces, and that's why at the global level and community level as well, we are organizing at different spaces to amplify our voices. And we have extreme events. We live in very fragile ecosystems in some areas, like in my community. Half of it is dry. It's almost now not inhabitable due to rising temperatures. It's become so hot. And then we also have frequent droughts and the prolonged one. And for instance, in some areas like Marsabit, they have never seen rainfall for the past 6 years, but this year they saw rainfall and flooding, and this has resulted in damage and loss to our lands and territories. I'll show you in the next clip photos. And of course, we have losses in terms of our livestock and crops, and this leads to loss of production because we do not produce enough that we need for our livelihood. And of course, that's our assets as indigenous peoples. That's what we count as assets, either your natural resources and what you have in your territory, as well as your livestock, what the community owns. And of course, in some areas, we've had documented cases where you have extinction of species, like they completely cannot be found in our territories when you do the monitoring by community, and they are no longer found there, and they had significant cultural implication for communities and the traditions. The traditional livelihood in terms of livestock keeping, mostly are pastoralists or hunter-gatherers. It's also been affected. We have destruction of our communal homes, especially those who live in villages, congregation, and some have been forced to migrate as well. And this creates a loss of place and also sense, and also kind of damages the social fabric of the community, because people are forced to move from place to place and sometimes migrate from the community, and then you don't have that social cohesion. And our water sources, we have those that in the community, our groundwater that is condemned. It's not safe for human consumption or even livestock. We've had livestock dying from consuming that. And of course, it's been tested, and we've had loss of life. And even last week, as we were here discussing about climate change, we've had flooding in different communities, and we've had people being swept away and killed. And then, of course, in our communities as indigenous people, we cannot forget to say that we also have gendered impacts of climate change, and we have the presentation that women and children become more vulnerable because the men can migrate and they can run to safer grounds, for instance, during flooding, but the women are impacted. And this is a photo. You can see the flooding, the impact to the territories, the damage to food crops, and also a whole village. You cannot, of course, they couldn't take the whole area, but people have been forced to migrate because this is a flood that came to Marsabit County after they've not seen rain for 6 years, and it was able to clear out, and the victims were women more and the children. And of course, our communities are not just sitting because we are impacted by climate change and all this loss and damage happening, but they're also having different responses, and they're, because we have traditional knowledge, and we're also in these spaces pushing for the recognition and adoption of the Indigenous Peoples and Knowledge Platform and its operationalization, because we believe Indigenous knowledge in terms of monitoring and reporting can be able to inform on how we address climate change issues. And of course, communities, since decades, they've been doing a disaster preparedness and early warning systems, and they have that in place within our communities. We have alternative energy development. People are also practicing different livelihood that are sustainable, and also, for instance, in natural resource management, we've documented some for women, like in the forest sector, the way they've been doing it. And we have community women also having a creative initiative in terms of managing their energy. And of course, I would like to highlight, like, there's quite a number of organizations and also the Kenya government which has tried to come up with an insurance mechanism, like for pastoralist community, targeted at the livestock sector. And of course, and also we have our devolved governance system where some few county governments have been able to come up with a climate change act, their own local law, and also setting up funding, but of course allocating like a percentage, 1% of whatever their budget they're receiving from the national government. And this is a small component, and we want it to be scaled up, and also for the livestock insurance as well to kind of move beyond creating support only when a drought happen, and also the payout that's only targeted maybe at giving livestock farmers a few dollars to handle the feeds for the remaining herd, but also move beyond that humanitarian kind of focus to cover other social issues. And of course, here we have quick questions in terms of risks, and it's how can our governments or the proposals that we have in terms of loss and damage, how can we diversify the risk? If a livestock farmer loses the herd, and there are a lot of people in the supply chain depending on that, how can we diversify so that everyone at least bears some costs? And of course, these risks and loss and damage requires like long-term thinking, because I have seen that the interventions are targeted at when we have the loss and damage happening. How do we think beyond? And of course, looking at the future focus instead of focusing on today, this is the challenge, and also providing finance, not like charity, because we are not demanding charity. This is a duty of the polluters to pay to the countries that are already suffering the loss and damage. And also, how do we give voice to people who cannot be able to speak for themselves, who don't understand what is happening, as Dinda said, and also building the capacity to act, engage in these spaces, and also committing resources that are enough to create sustainable change, not just short-term changes. And of course, in these spaces, we are asking for initiatives, ambitious climate change actions that also respect communities, free, prior, informed consent. Of course, those that have stronger work plan, like the WASO mechanism, we want a stronger work plan that's also financed, because when you have something, create a bank account with an empty, no deposits, then what do you expect to be taken? And of course, I think in these spaces, people are avoiding to discuss more about loss and damage, and we know saying that there's insufficient evidence, statistical evidence to link it to climate change, but it's happening. It never used to be there before, so the discussion needs to be there now, and also the focus on an economic loss, because that's the more serious that's happening within our community, and having those integrated risk management approach where sectors are able to speak to each other, they're able to relate and also address it. If it's health, they can be able to talk to water sector people and so forth, and also link to community and create actions that are participatory in nature. And of course, key central to this is issues of rights, and especially land rights, because they're all interlinked in the way we cope with loss and damage. And of course, support to strengthen the social movements at the local level, because they have a role to play. Yeah, and thank you, Soranyo, in my language. Thank you.
Edna, thank you so much. In such a short time, you ran through the whole problems of the WIM and the loss and damage mechanism, but in a very concise way. Highlighting, especially, I think, from what I learned from you is that there are solutions, there are ways how local communities, especially indigenous communities, actually know how to adapt to changes. But now with these extreme weather events, which become more and more crazy, it becomes more and more hard, and you don't ask for charity, but you ask for finances, which is the duty of the polluters, as you said. You also introduced us to several approaches which you would like to proposed like more participation of local communities, especially having a rights-based approach, which all becomes, of course, more and more difficult the less land you have because of the impacts of climate change. But you also mentioned the insurances, which gives me a chance to introduce our next speaker, Sabine. Because Sabine and we both work for German organizations, and we know that governments from the global north are not really willing to put money on the table when it comes to many things, but especially to loss and damage. But they give us an offer, which is called climate risk insurance. Well, especially here in the European Union, it's the Insure Resilience Initiative being discussed. There's quite a lot of money flowing, but somehow the interest is also to involve the private sector, the big insurance companies. So I'm a bit wondering, out of my very naive understanding, isn't it serving more the interests of these insurances, or does it really help local people? So maybe you can share some insights with us on that issue.
Thank you so much for being invited here. I feel so honored that I sit with you here on a panel, especially that my colleagues and friends sitting here next to me have the profound experience gained from the ground, working with the communities. That is absolutely not the case in my career. Bread for the World is working in partnerships with NGOs in the Global South, but I visited over hundreds of communities worldwide, so I can only represent their voices and experience that I made visiting the communities. So, but on a policy level, loss and damage is a new kid on the block. Yeah? So 10 years ago, when Bread for the World started, especially with our partners from the Pacific, to discuss the topic of loss and damage in the UNFCCC, so at COP 13, 14, we were looked like, negotiators looked at us as we were aliens from another space. So they were basically like, what are you talking about? Don't make it an issue because you are exploding the negotiations. You will block everything, especially in Copenhagen when we came up with the topic again, everyone was like, that will be the reason why nothing will move here if you come up with this topic. So we are so glad and grateful that it has a standalone item now on the agenda. No, not on the agenda. In the Paris Agreement, it's not on the agenda. That is my problem. That's what I will share with you now. So we are glad it has a standalone, it is recognized in the Paris Agreement, but no finance is foreseen. And even worse, United States made very clear, and that was under Obama, it was not Trump. You know? So even the nice guy Obama made sure that they put a liability clause in it. It means that no state can ever bring another state to court and sue them for climate damages. Yeah? And you can never ask for compensation. So the Marshall Islands, fighting very much by themselves with the support of the least developed countries and small island states, they made sure that this liability clause gets kicked out of the Paris Agreement, but it's still in the decision paper of Paris. So, and to be frank, I don't think that my German government was very outspoken against the decision of the United States. I think all rich countries were hiding behind the states and let them be the bad cop, and they're secretly very agreed that this liability clause should be in. So finance is not foreseen, and we have seen now here in the negotiations this week that also in future finance should not be foreseen. They will come up this afternoon with a compromise text. What I've seen, I'm not very happy with it, but at least it opens a little bit of a window that the Warsaw Mechanism would at least be allowed to look at some financial sources. That doesn't mean that they are provided. So, and loss and damage is very low on the agenda. We need it basically now on the within the subsidiary bodies, and this is now the last fight starting for the next 3 days. And I would say it is a big success if loss and damage becomes like a permanent agenda item on the SPs. And then I'm happy at the end of the week for what you can reach here at this COP. And seriously, we are asking for nothing, because what we really need is the compensation of climate damages, and the polluter pays principle. This is what should be applied. So, and we are even not negotiating this here. It's not on the table at all. Then the German government came up with an initiative called Intro-Resilience. They launched it at the G7 2015 in Bavaria, and they have widened it and supported it also in G20. They came up with it again. And to be honest, I was happy that Germany launched an initiative voluntarily by themselves to give a little bit of money. It is really not a lot. It is a ridiculous small amount of money. Yeah, seriously, it's a total of 550 million euros in total that they collected from all states, and Germany gave a total of 190 million euro. Germany, by the way, also financed this COP here. It's 170 million only for building up the tents. So if you compare this now, for compensating the poorest countries in the event, in the case of an extreme weather event, sorry, where is the relation? You know, so it's a small amount of money. Still, it's better than having nothing, and it's the beginning. And we are glad that at least on a voluntary basis, they are giving a little bit for an initiative that is actually life-saving. And it is not the money that they give to an insurance company. No, it goes to the initiative launched by the African Union. It's called African Risk Capacity. It's a sovereign risk pool. There is a lot of misconception. I was attacked quite often, and they're like, Bread for the World is supporting insurance companies. No, not at all. This is an interstate risk pool within some African states. So in case of a drought, a flash flood, and now also of storms, that's new, they have included it. So these states within themselves, they help each other, either with finance or with food. So, and this is the initiative where Germany put money in. So, but this is what should be mandatory. This is all on a voluntary basis. What we need is, of course, a fund for loss and damage where all rich countries have to put money in it and, of course, compensate the poorest countries for their loss and damage. But I also don't think it should not only be industrialized countries. I wouldn't know why Saudi Arabia should be left out of their, for example, obligation, but that's another story. So today something will happen right when we leave the room. 15 minutes later, the German government, together with the Fiji COP presidency, they will launch now a new initiative. They will try to broaden now this Intro-Resilience initiative to get more donors on board. And they make it now in a very official statement. They launched a global partnership on Intro-Resilience. I have nothing against it that they finally try to get more rich countries paying money into the sovereign risk pools. My concern is simply that the governments try to shift their responsibility towards the private sector, you know, and then, of course, it becomes a problem. Because now the focus is still very much on the vulnerability and the needs of the poorest people. But if you get the corporate world included in this initiative, they have, of course, different interests. And then the focus might lift towards the benefit of the corporate world. But on the other hand, I must say it is a desperate attempt, what is happening today. They are desperate to find private sector who would finance this, but they are not crazy and not stupid. This is the corporate world. They are not financing in anything that is risky for them, and climate change is highly risky for them. So insurance companies, they of course only go in the business where the risk is very low. That is profitable for them. But not if we are heading towards a 3 degrees warmer world, and also all states know it. No one can pay this madness. So the climate risk insurance, I couldn't believe that I say that. They became my best friends because they give climate change a price tag. They put a price on it and they say very clearly to the governments, you have to exit coal. We are not paying for your mistakes that you are doing here. I leave it now by here because I'm not going now in any technical details of this Intro-Resilience stuff, but you can ask me any questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sabine, for these insights, like really explaining to us also what the trick is with loss and damage, and that somehow what seems so nice on the paper at the end, maybe my fear that the insular resilience might only serve the corporate interest, you say, well, they are not interested at all because it's too risky for them and no one can pay for these damages. So the floor is open. Please feel free to comment, ask questions to all of our panelists, introduce yourself quickly, and I would be very grateful, extremely grateful, if you can make your questions short and sharp. Thank you. Please raise your hands.
Hello, my name is Sohna Toure from Young Volunteers for the Environment, the Gambia. The last speaker, your speech was quite precise and precise. For the second to last speaker, I have a question for you about loss and damage in your country. What is the government doing about it? And the picture you saw that many lives are lost about children and women, is it in the whole region or in one aspect of it? And what are the way forward you are looking into to avoid another kind of this happening, like what just happened in Sierra Leone, like to avoid something like that? Are you working on it, or what is the government doing about it, or the community? Thank you.
We collect 2, 3 questions and then we...
Hi, I'm Tejal from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Bombay, India. I have a question for the first 2 speakers, actually, about, you were talking about agriculture, and its situation is fairly similar back home from where I come from as well. And agriculture is typically characterized by low levels of modern scientific and technological input, and also, therefore, extremely low levels of productivity. And there is a long-standing poverty trap that farmers are caught in, and women, of course, suffer the most because of it. And despite indigenous knowledge and wisdom, etc., that we have had, our women have been undernourished, malnourished, large numbers of them dying in childbirth for a very, very long time, with or without climate change. So this has been true despite many years of wisdom that we call indigenous knowledge and wisdom. And modern scientific and technological progress, in some sense, has made a difference in all of our countries when it comes to health indicators, for example. So when we talk about agriculture, and climate change, of course, is an unprecedented kind of a problem. So whether we have the knowledge to, in fact, even understand what its impacts are going to be and to be able to face them is a big question. So instead of sort of taking this position that modern scientific knowledge belongs to multinational corporations of the first world, and indigenous knowledge is ours, and sort of get caught in that binary, shouldn't we be focusing on increasing the technological and scientific capabilities of our women so that their economic strength is bolstered, instead of allowing multinational corporations to get into that vacuum and use it to exploit our people?
There was one question here.
I'm Mary Magloria. I've already introduced myself before. I want to say thank you to the last speaker for the discussion on climate risk insurance. My question is on the modalities for the risk insurance. Is it going to be project specific, like you say, like agriculture, in which case probably they will require different policies? I don't know what the details are. I would like you to throw more light on the details, because I know that, like in my country, Nigeria, I was already canvassing for climate insurance, because you have issues that climate has taken the nature of the regular insurances that you now see. In terms of, we have erosion issues. So I was canvassing for specific insurance for erosion projects, so that when you have landslides and when you have issues like that, it becomes a specific product for the insurance industry to accept as a policy and relate to. You also have issues that has to do with deforestation. It becomes an insurance risk for the climate industry to take on as a policy, just the same way that you do your house insurance, car insurance, and all that. I was canvassing for different projects like that to become a sub-item for the climate insurance to take on, and either in partnership with the banking industry or whatever, the details. So I would like to know what details Germany has, or the one for partnership with Fuji or whatever, to have a better understanding. Thank you.
I will allow one more question. Oh, there are two more. Are you ready to take on all these questions and then we make one round of sharp responses? Is that okay? Or you want to collect a few and then have a second round? Okay. So Tetet is the last one and then we make a second round.
Thank you very much to the panel, and I'm just so happy that, you know, we have an all-female North-South panel for today.
Happy Gender Day.
Yes. Because we're so sick and tired of panels, male-only panels, and white male panels mostly. But anyway, my question is to Sabina. You mentioned about governments taking the initiative for putting this climate risk insurance, but then you're also saying that the private sector doesn't find it sexy because, you know, adaptation and loss and damage, there's no money in it. So I'm in a bit of a conundrum. How do you now expect to raise the resources for this insurance when governments are saying that public money is not enough and it's not a priority, and corporations don't find it profitable enough to be excited about? Yeah?
Yeah, so I'm giving the panelists now a chance to answer because all of them have been addressed with certain questions. Please try to make it maximum 2 minutes each. Sabine,
absolutely. So first of all, there are private climate risk insurance for the agriculture sector. For example, Syngenta Foundation. They only give an insurance on their own seeds, and it's like hybrid and whatever terrible stuff that they are selling. So this is really bad, and this is we reject it with a clear position that this should not happen at all. So insofar with Insure Resilience, I cannot see that. No? We made sure that this is not happening, and so far I have no proof that anything like this with certain policies is a precondition. Condition are contingency plans of the government. So only African governments get money if they make clear that they have a contingency plan, and there they have to state very clear that they understand all their marginalized groups and have access to them, to help them. But if there is no civil society in a country, let's say Ethiopia, then it's difficult to prove where is the money actually going. So this is our job. And Tetet, the thing is, everyone believes here, negotiators believe we are not paying for loss and damage, but it is already happening, and they pay for it anyway. So Hurricane Irma costed the United States $380 billion. So what is the negotiation about it providing climate finance? They just don't provide it for the poorest countries. Yeah, that is de facto really bad, but loss and damage finance is provided day by day. So here, there is only the question of justice. No? That is missing in the whole debate, so that the poorest countries have to pay now for their own damages that they have not caused. So I believe there is no way then that rich countries, all exporting countries, all countries in a position to do so, they will have to pay for it. Otherwise, for example, so when I'm in a discussion with my own government, we're like, if you don't provide it, what will be then the next steps? Of course, people will experience relocation, displacement, refugees, if they're not able to recover after natural disaster, climate-related disaster has hit them. So, and of course, then if they have no choice to recover in the place where they are, they will have to flee this place or migrate. So, and this is the consequence, and that will cause further humanitarian problems, and finally, they have to pay. This is the understanding, the shift that they have to understand. You are paying for it either or the other way, you know? If you give now a little bit of money, for example, adaptation is 4 times cheaper than paying for loss and damage. So if this is just like a simple equal that everyone should understand, no? And this is probably our job to make that heard and understand.
Okay, when it comes to modern agricultural technologies, we're not disputing that there are technologies that can help farmers to succeed in their production. However, where I come from, modern agricultural technologies are mainly controlled by businesses. They are mainly not helping the farmers at local level, but they are used to make more profits. If they are made available to the small-scale farmers, it's something that they cannot afford. That is why in the challenges I mentioned that there's lack of access to resources, technology, and also finance. And, when we talk about the local solutions, we're not saying that that is the only way that the local farmers can survive. That is their current survival kit. This is what they are using to survive at their current situation. However, climate impacts are there, and they cannot be disputed, and this is what they use to survive. Modern technologies are only used for big farmers and for corporates. They take control of everything. They do not give space for small farmers to access them, access funding, and to be trained on technology. That is why in the gender action plans, there's a mention that there has to be technological transfer and a framework to help women at local level and also communities, the small-scale farmers in agriculture. Thank you.
I will just add the Defile's statements that we know that seeds is not only about to planting a tree, seeds is about the sovereignty. So when we following the agenda of the only to follow the technology for the examples and also the seeds that really promote it globally, then what happens usually is we are teach to planting this the seeds, the similar seeds, and for the products that not really for the people's interests. For example, it's more about how to increase your productions to giving supply or provide the market interests. Because what really happened, for example, in Indonesia, in Papua, they force they open some lands to plant the rice, for example. But we know that the Papua's society not consuming rice, but the rice itself is not for the people, but for the others. So it's really related with the sovereignty.
I had a question in terms of if the flooding is happening only in a few regions. No, we currently in Kenya they're experiencing heavy rainfalls that are resulting in flooding, but in different regions. But I only showed for the 2 regions where we work, part of it. And then in terms of what the government is doing, government of Kenya is progressive. They have a number of policies in place. We have a national climate change response strategy. We have the Climate Change Act, which is progressive in terms of having a higher level council that supports to have a president, different ministers sitting there, and also space for marginalized community to be able to participate and shape on how climate change funding and actions are going to be implemented within the country. However, and also we have entry points at the county level. We have the different planning levels, and as a community, I feel, of course, we have a disaster response strategy as well, but I feel it's not really yet done in an integrated manner, and that's where it needs to improve. And of course, our countries are vulnerable in terms of these extreme events, and handling it also places more burden on them. And of course, as communities, we are also joining alliances with other organizations, doing advocacy, calling for a more integrated approach in terms of handling risks associated with climate change. When our county governments are doing the development planning, we're also telling them to make sure it's climate smart. It also has a gender lens to it so that they can be able to address it, and also that they also put an element of gender-based budgeting so that they can be able to address gender issues. And also because the National Climate Change Act, the Climate Change Act we have, the counties are supposed, we have 47, they're supposed to also have their own, but it's only, I think, 5 who've done it. So we still have a long way to go in terms of them taking it to the local level. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you to the panelists for getting back to the questions, and thank you also for kind of the nice words that we are an all-female, #all-female panel. But on the other hand, I was a bit concerned because I thought we are talking about women's rights, we are talking about gender issues, but why is it always only women talking about it? So next time we'll definitely have a few men on the panel who are fully committed feminists. There's one standing, I know it. So there are more questions. One I see here, and yeah, you raised your hand first, and then you. Okay.
One question for the Kenyan case.
Can you introduce yourself? That would be wonderful.
And Elisa Milani from Italy, Italy. One question for the Kenyan case as a model. Of course, everything is there, you say, from state level to monitor the climate change, it seems, but it's not implemented what at the community level, what I understand from your experience. I would like to know, because I think in this COP23, all this is being mentioned now, the problem of migration, women migration. I would like to know this question of flooding, and so what is in the impact of the community level from migration from the countryside to the town, and the other hand, what now we know that Kenya has a very political situation, conflict political situation, because there is also impact on the conflict situation on the country also when you have a movement migration, so we know everything. So what is, on the case of Kenya, the impact of this migration, climate migration, if there is, from community level to the big town, on the political conflict level?
Actually, mine was more of just a quick comment. So I work for the IRI, the International Research Institute for Climate and Society at Columbia University. I'm in the financial instrument sector team, so my team works on micro-level index insurance projects around the world. And I just had a comment regarding the Syngenta when actually, because it's a bit incorrect, the foundation develops index insurance in different parts of the world, and it actually has nothing to do with Syngenta seeds. Because I went to the field with them and the farmers asked that question, and the response was no, like it's not related to people buying Syngenta seeds. But it's really interesting to be here, especially at this COP, because we hear so much about insurance, and there's so many people trying to sell it as the silver bullet, which it's not. But at the same time, it does work well at small scale level when it's applied properly and with a number of conditions. So thank you.
One last question.
Olfazla, c'est Jungle CC. Just first note that I will be. I'm not really happy seeing a room full of women, but I will be happy seeing balanced men and women discussing gender issues because it's issue not only for women but for all society. My questions for all panelists. Because I'm a bit curious, we are as civil society organizations, local communities struggling to implement climate action to fight climate change. Moving from international, national, and local level, I only see it from one way, like from local communities acting in local level. But I want to see or asking about how UNFCCC bodies or institutions or national contribution helping your organization implementing climate actions actually in local level. Thank you.
Okay, I think, yeah, I have 1 more minute to collect questions. So there were 2 hands raised. If you make it very short, Nina, and who else? Was there someone else? Oh, only 1 question. Yeah.
Sorry, but this is just a feedback or a comment. But maybe in the future we also need to deepen the conversation so that we can also take into account the impacts of climate change with respect to sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. Because from where I come from in the Philippines, I had the opportunity of working with communities in a few provinces that were severely hit by the Typhoon Haiyan. And what we've observed is that we don't have same-sex unions, so we don't recognize same-sex marriages. And it has been so difficult for gay and lesbian couples to access their, the entitlements that heterosexual couples could access in times of disasters whenever they lose their homes and livelihoods. And for example, even in employment opportunities, gays were not prioritized in fish caging activities. So when you catch fish, you don't really have to set out into the sea, but you just have to work with other people in managing the fish pens. So it's not exactly as labor intensive, and yet there's that discrimination along the lines of gender. And it's also important to note that among poor communities, gays and lesbians are the breadwinners, and yet because the way that we define households are de facto, male-headed households, they're not also recognized as head of households. So these are some of the issues that maybe in the future, as we move on with conversations, especially this will still go on for some time. Maybe this is something that we can also take into account.
Thank you so much, Nina. Luckily, Nina works for Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, so she will definitely be on the board developing the next event. Well, it's time for the panelists to get back to the audience about the questions. We have exactly 9 minutes, 10 minutes. So each of you has a bit more than 2 minutes. No, 2 minutes. I also have to say a few words at the end. And Sabine, because you have to run away, so maybe you just start.
Thank you. No, I run away at 1 p.m. sharp because of the Intro Resilience launch. No, what I want to say, I gratefully accepted to attend this panel because in our own work on loss and damage, I realized that we were not respecting gender aspects in a way it should be done. I said loss and damage is the new kid on the block. It is the new baby on the block, to be honest. And I just want to encourage all of you who are very experienced in gender work to have a deep look into loss and damage, especially what you have mentioned, the aspect of migration and the non-economic loss and damages. Migration is a part of it, but there is more. There is like the loss of traditions, social cohesion, loss of language, identity, culture. What if Tuvalu is drowning and they had to, for example, resettle or build up a Tuvalu 2 in Australia? So that won't happen because the Tuvaluans said very strongly they don't want to have this, but then they will have something like diaspora. However, this topic is crucial, and we have no expertise, not really built up on that, and too less research was done on this topic. And I hope of your support, of those who are working on gender issues, that they get very heavily involved in this topic. Thank you.
Okay, when it comes to the UNFCCC processes and the gender issues, I'm sure you have heard about the Gender Action Plan that, yes, women are happy that there has been a text which has been adopted, though we still have some language to query there. But however, when it comes to agriculture, I must say I'm very disappointed because not much has been done, and in most of the insertions, observers were not allowed, and it seems like agriculture is being, pushed away, and opportunities are being created for businesses to make more profit, make more money, because insurance issue is now introduced to agricultural sector. So, yeah, there hasn't been much that has been done when it comes to agriculture. Thank you.
Well, for the forestry also, I don't think the discussions regarding the non-market mechanism, for example, can be used now. But what we can do, for previously we know that the Paris Agreement have the principles, and now we also have the gender action plans that of course my organizations also always remind our national government that you really have to consider the gender in all of the policies and actions in national and local levels. But it's still struggle for us. But at least in for some spaces they considered or they acknowledge about the gender. But the most or the biggest challenge is how to bring it really into the local community, so the local community also can be affected positively by the negotiations.
The challenge of non-implementation of different response strategy or plans that countries have, I think it happens in a number of developing countries. I think it's because of finance or other technical kind of needs. But I think as well as non-state actors, we should think beyond and look what is the role we can play really to come to our governments and say this is what we can offer, this is the action we could support, because they can't realize the actions alone. They need support from us as well. And of course, migration is happening. Sometimes it's internally, and sometimes communities do agree in terms. And some were there historically. There were conflict in some places, but some places people have mediated, and now people have an understanding. And sometimes in my community, we are also in Uganda, and we do kind of migration, like the political boundaries are there, but we do not see them. They were created, and so I wouldn't say we have a political conflict. Sometimes it's resource-based, but I think people usually come to an understanding when they do their own traditional mediation within communities.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. I'm happy that you were so interested in this panel and that you asked exactly the questions that had to be asked. I think we also will take it up, also some recommendations that have really been discussed. Also, thank you, Sabine, for the encouragement that we should look at this whole loss and damage issue through the gender lens. That was also my impression, that it has not been done enough. So this is also an interesting maybe research or workshop project for the future we can think about. I think we have looked at a lot of so-called solutions. Well, allow me to say, I think these are usually often false solutions when it comes, for example, to biofuel projects like the palm oil industry in Indonesia, or the climate smart agriculture that is introduced, for example, in South Africa. But also, we were a bit wondering, can we really say that this whole climate risk insurances, or especially a scheme like Insure Resilience, can be called false solution? I think we can't label it so far, but we will work on it. So thank you very much for all of you. If you're interested a little bit in the work we are doing, there's some brochures. I would also like to, besides the panelists, so put your hands together one more time for the panelists. Thank you so much. I really would like to thank my colleagues from Gender CC and LIFE for supporting this project with a lot of love and power. Women power. But also thank you to my colleagues from Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung who have supported this event, and also the technicians back there. I don't know if you ever get said thank you, but thank you very much. It worked out well. And before you run away, either to the launch of the Insure Resilience partnership, I also want to announce that there's an action taking place in the Bula zone, because this year has been a very bad year when it comes to women human rights defenders, and we want to honor all these women that have been killed this year, but also in general. So there's an action in Bula zone close to the entry, I think. A few people are running over. You have half an hour time. I think this is enough. Once again, thank you for having been here with us, and hope to see you again.
for this, because now we are looking for alliances in Africa.